Okay, good evening. Today we are learning the second half of Samach Tes Amud Beis. We're starting at a Mishnah halfway down, and we'll be heading toward the bottom of Ayin Amud Beis, about 10 lines from the bottom at the pasuk of Mar Behono. That's where we're going to be stopping. Let's jump right in. Says the Mishnah as follows, Samach Tes Amud Beis halfway down. Shamin para v'chamor v'chol davar shu osa v'ochel lemechza. We're talking about cases where you and I have a partnership. You're the investor, and I'm the manager of the property, or I'm the worker. So the halacha is when it comes to a para and chamor, or anything that's oseh ve'ochel, anything that can produce for you, or that can give you food, so then we're allowed to do 50-50. What was the concern? The concern is as follows. You're the investor. You've given the primary money. I'm the worker. But if we agree to split 50-50, that means that I've worked for you for free, and that's usser. So here the Mishnah says it's not usser if that which you are watching or that which you're working with can provide you with services or with food. A chamor can provide you with services, and a para can provide you with milk. All is fine and good. And in that case, says the Mishnah, makom shenagu lachlok as havlados miyad cholken, that if the animals that you're watching have children, so if the minhag in that place is to give out those animals to the two owners, one the investor, and the other is me, the worker. So then cholken, makom shenagu legadel yagdilu. But if it's customary that the worker should raise those animals, then he would raise those animals, even for no extra pay, uniquely, ayin in the Rishonim. And Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Shaman Egel im imo v'siach im imo, animals with their mothers are treated as one. We don't separate the animals from their mothers because most animals are nursing, and most animals don't need a lot of tipul, they don't need a lot of care. And the last end of the Mishnah, which in fact will be the beginning of today's conversation, is umafriz al sadehu, a little bit of a unique phraseology. Rashi says it's not mafriz, Rashi says it's mafrin, and Rashi says mafrin al sadeh loshen para v'rava uvigmara para mafarish ketzad mafrin, but it means over here is that we increase the rent. When it comes to a field, you're allowed to increase the rent. The eino choshesh mishum ribis. So a little bit of a, I don't know what the word mafriz means in this context. Again,
Sounds familiar.
what?
You see this word before, Rashi changed. Seems familiar.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Probably.
I mean, the word we have, Prazim, we have like Megillah, we have like the word, but mafriz is a bit of an odd word for this context, which makes it seem like Rashi was, as usually is, accurate. So then the second part of Rashi says, "V'li nira mafriz b'zayin lashon marchiv u'magdil." All right, so whatever. The point is that the end of the Mishnah is saying that you're allowed to increase the cost of your field. Let's jump into the Gemara. Tanu Rabban and the rabbis have taught us in a brisa, 2/3 of the way down on Samach Tes and the Beis. Mafriz al sadehu, you are allowed to increase your rent vein choshesh mishum ribis, similar to our Mishnah, but then this brisa adds more. Ketzad. So I rent out your field, 10 kurim chitin for a year. The Omer, and I say to you, Omer lo tein li masayim zuz va'afar nesena. Give me a couple hundred zuz, and I will invest and make the field a better field. And I can produce for you 12 kur instead of 10 kur. So the halacha is that this is mutter. You're giving me a loan, I'm giving you more back. It doesn't matter. It's mutter. Why is it mutter? So the Rishonim here explain the reason why it's mutter is because it's no different than an investment in a property that benefits everybody. It's not a loan. It's considered an investment in the property. Aval ein mafriz lo ala chanus v'lo ala sfina. But you're not allowed to do this when it comes to a store or when it comes to a sfina. A distinction being that when it comes to the field itself, I can improve the field itself. When it comes to a store, I can't really improve the store itself in a way that would be meaningful to the sale of the product. Says the Gemara, that's really not so true. Amar of Nachman, Amar Rabba Barabu, Apamim Shemafriz Alachanus. Sometimes you can increase the rent and you can invest in the store, Latsur Batsura, to make the store look prettier, to make it a little bit more inviting. So we have this all the time. There are some stores that are physically appealing, irrelevant of what they sell. Then there are stores that need an upgrade, right? I'm not going to drop names, but I need to.
We all know.
But we all know I have some thoughts, which I'll hold to my until the computer's off. Okay, so the Gemara says that sometimes you're allowed to be mafriz in a store to change the rent, latzor batsura, in order to make it to beautify the room, or svina lasos la iskiraya, which is to add a mast or to add a sail. All of that is considered fine. Why is this allowed? Because chanas latzor batsurta, the reason why we are allowed to invest in a store by making it more decorative is that savu ba'inshi. People will enjoy the store more, v'hava agrat fe, and it will lead to more profits. And Sfina Lasos La Iskaria, when it comes to a boat to add a mast, Kevan de Shvira Iskaria Tve, since the Iskaria makes it more beautiful. So therefore, Agra Tve, more people will want to rent your boat. This is kind of the way things work, especially in our culture. If we have two equal stores, one's more beautiful than the other, we typically would pick the more beautiful of the two. The Gemara now jumps into a sugya about Sfina, 2 lines before the wide lines. 8 lines before the bottom of the page, Samach Tesem and Beis Sfinta, in regards to a boat, Amarav Agra Upagra. The Gemara says that when it comes to a boat, the person who rents the boat, I have to pay you rent and I have to pay you damages. So this is a problem as we've discussed. Why is this a problem? Because if I have to pay you rent, let's say your boat costs $10,000 and I have to pay you $1,000 rent. Let's say I total the boat and I have to pay you the cost of the boat. So then if I pay you the cost of the boat plus the rent, I paid you more than the cost of the boat. So once you're saying pagra, that you've accepted upon yourself all of the insurance costs, if you damage, if the item gets totaled, then you're paying more than the cost of the item. So Amr Leir of Kahana Viravasi Lirav, Iagra lo pagri, pagra lo agra. If you're paying rent, you should not be paying for damages. And if you're paying for damages, you should not be paying rent, because again, there's a concern that you will be giving to the original owner more than is the cost of the item. So they asked this, huh?
It's a separate thing. One thing is to rent the boat, and then while you're renting the boat, you pay to use the boat for that time, and then you destroy the boat. It's 2 different things.
The boat is $10,000 and rent is $1,000, and I pay you $11,000. That's more than all of your costs.
But it doesn't change the fact that I'm out there running a business, and that $1,000 is how I make it. It's okay. I understand that, but it's 2 separate things.
It's 2 separate things. It's awesome. It's mechzek ribis.
It shouldn't be usher because it's not. It's taka not ribis.
The Gemara is concerned about the fact that you gave me your boat, and I gave you back more than you gave me. That's not right. That's mechzek ribis. You're right.
Where's the halal?
It's mechzek ribis. It's mechzek ribis. It's not ribis. It's mechzek ribis. It's not. Remember, ribis k'tzutza is dindo, right? So this is avak ribis. This is low level. We'll actually see a heter on ayin amid aleph for avak ribis, where it is in fact mutter. So what did Rav say back to this claim? Because Rav was the one who said agra upagra, that by a boat you have rent and you have costs of damages. So the Gemara says on the first of the long lines, Shasik Rav, he was quiet. He didn't know what to say. He thought the din was agra upagra, but they pushed back on him that he agra lo pagra and he pagra lo agra. So the Gemara says, Amrav Sheshas, my time is Shasik Rav. Why did Rav not know how to answer this question? So says the Gemara, Lo shmi'alei hadatanya. He had not yet heard this brisa. By the way, this is absolutely fascinating that Rav did not know a brisa. Let's remember that Rav was a Talmud of Rebbe. So Rebbe had all the Mishnayos. That also probably means that Rebbe didn't have all the brises either, which is of course possible, obviously, but it's just difficult. It's a bit of a difficult pill to swallow, but that's what the Gemara says. Rav didn't know this brisa. What does the brisa say? That even though between me and another yid we cannot have a relationship of tzon barzel, the relationship of tzon barzel is where the worker takes all of the profits and losses and he takes all of the risks. That's not allowed. But we are allowed to have a relationship like that with a goy. We're going to see this more in the Mishnah on Ayin Amud Beis. Aval Amru Hasham par lechaveru Amr lo hare parascha asuya alai b'shloshim dinar. If you and I have a deal together where I watch your cow, or I should say you're the investor and I'm the worker, and if I say hare parascha asuya alai b'shloshim dinar, I'm going to take care of it for 30 dinar, and I'll produce for you a sela for a chodesh. So that's mutter lefi shelo asa damim, because he didn't take full responsibility. That's what asa damim means. Says the Gemara, what do you mean below asa? What do you mean he didn't take full responsibility? So the Gemara makes a new kimta on this brisa of Amar Rav Sheishes lo asa damim mechayim. It means that he didn't take full responsibility when one was living, and this was how we get back to our discussion of Rav. When the animal is alive, I'm not going to pay for the full losses of the animal when that happens. So that's not going to be a concern. It's ela la'achar misa, only if, in fact, an animal dies. That's what Rashi says on the bottom. Ela la'achar misa shim tamus o im tishaver alma kol kama de lo kabila le zula. For as long as he doesn't accept the losses, lav milvihi gabe v'gabe svina nami lo kabila le zula. He hadn't taken any losses. So that is how Rav can say agro pagra, but it's a little bit complicated to understand the Gemara because it seems from the Gemara that the Brisa is saying that there was no pagra because he says velo asa damin, shelo asa damin. So how do we paskin in this case? Amar Rav Papa hilchasa sfina agro pagra halacha l'maisa. Like Tex said earlier, it's acceptable. We have a case scenario where I'm allowed to rent and to make a chakira and say, yes, I'm allowed to rent. That's my business. You took my boat for 10 days. For those 10 days, you owe me $1,000. No problem. Then you totaled my boat. Okay, well, if you then totaled my boat, now you owe me for my boat. So that's what the Gemara concludes. But there was a discussion as to whether or not that was reasonable.
He's a shovel in here, right?
He's a socher. He's a socher, correct.
Socher is chayav and everything, right?
No, the shomer chinam is chayav and everything. Shomer chinam is pater for gneiv and aveda. Shomer sachar and the socher is chayav for gneiv and aveda. So if you do something wrong, whatever you lose the item, you're chayav as a socher. So here, this is a little different. Here, what? No, you're still responsible, even for aveda. If you're a socher, if you're a shomer sachar or a socher, you're chayav on those things. So the Gemara here makes the chakir that you wanted to make before, that the rental money that I bring in is not to be confused with the fact that you ruined my ship. So my ship is $10,000. That's a cheap ship, 10,000. Yo, don't do that because I don't know the difference in a boat and a ship. So, although yachts have made the news lately, so what? Oh well, you've already lost me. It's fine. So that's what the Gemara says is hilchas sfina agro. And on the top of ayin and aleph, the Gemara says v'nagu b'nei kufra. The people who are b'nei kufra, Rashi says that they're baalei sfina. Kari b'nei kufra lefisha zofsin osam bezefes. They would waterproof their boats. So it's like the story of Moshe. They would waterproof their boats with zefes, with tar, which is an excellent waterproofer. And provided that there's enough open space within, then it would be buoyant and it would not sink. So that's what the Gemara says. These people were called B'nai Kufra, but the language that the Gemara uses, V'nahagu B'nai Kufra, Agra B'shas Mashicha. They would take rent at the beginning, which is a shtickle chiddush, because we learned that rent is in arrears, halachically. What? Right. And Pagra B'shas Shvira. And they would pay for damages only if and when it broke. So the Gemara is a little bit bothered by the language of Nohagu. We just said at the bottom of Samach Testament Beis, Hilchasa. It says the Gemara, Atu b'minhaga talya milsa. Who cares what your customs are? It's either mutter or it's not mutter. This isn't a minhag question. You want to talk about minhagim? Go talk about minhagim. That's not this conversation. It says the Gemara, no, mishum de masnisa, because of the Mishnah, Tanya minhaga. So that's also very odd. It says the Gemara, says Rashi, Mishum de Masnisa, Tanya de Mutter. They said that it's permissible. Therefore, Nahug Minhaga. A very strange Gemara. I don't understand it, honestly. I don't get it. That's what the Gemara. What?
Because of the right? Yes.
The language of the Mishnah of Makom Shenagi.
Not really about the case exactly, but
Yeah.
is that what it means?
No.
So I don't understand what.
The mutter kedikatani. No, because that Makom Shenagu was not talking.
There's nothing new with this case, yeah.
No. So the Gemara basically says what we wouldn't have thought, because it's a Mishnah, we're going to call it a minhag. I think what it means is that the language of v'nohagu isn't meant to be minhag-y. It's meant to just say this is what we do. Either way, the Gemara then picks up with what seems to be a massive chiddush. We'll soon see that it's not accurate to the way we thought it was the case. The Gemara says on Ayin and Aleph, 3 lines down, Amar Rav Anan Amar Shmuel Mos Shel Yisomim, when there's money that belongs to orphans, muter lahalvosan beribis. What does that even mean? So when a person's a yasom, they can make bank making loans because they're yisomim. Meichatesi. Amar de Rav Nachman. What? It's not even true, but we first have to analyze it. But let's see what it means first. Amar le Rav Nachman mishum de yasme ninhu svina lehu isura. Just because they're yisomim, we're going to feed them isurim. Meaning, we saw in earlier Gemaras that people lost their lives because of ribbis. You're going to tell these little kids that that we can just feed them isurim. All right, Zeus, I'm sorry that you went through terrible times. Don't worry, at least you can make some money. It's ridiculous. Not only that, says the Gemara, Yasme de achle de lav didhu leis lubasar shavkaihu. It says the Gemara that they did the same. They're going to end up just like their father. It's a big problem. You can't let the kids do this. Doesn't even make any sense. So Rav Nachman says to Rav Anan in the name, when Rav Anan was talking in the name of Shmuel, he said, "You got to explain this to me." Amar le emali ezo gufa de uvda hechihava. Tell me what transpired that you thought that Yisomim were allowed to charge interest, which is state in Chumash. Like, how do you're a Yasam, you're allowed to murder people. Like you're a Yasam, you're allowed to commit adultery. You're a Yasam, you're allowed to steal. It's Nisr Daraisa. What are you talking about? So the Gemara tells the story. Amar le, Hahu Duda. There was a particular Duda, which is it's a copper pot. The Bnei Mar Ukva, that the orphans of Mar Ukva had, to have a Bey Mar Shmuel. And it was given to Mar Shmuel. Takil v'yoivle, they measured it and they gave it to him. Takil v'shakile, and then they measured it when they took it back to measure the loss. Now, this doesn't happen with our pots. Our pots, by and large, are made of very, very high quality, very hard metals, hardened metals. So if you were to measure the pot before you lent it to someone and when you got it back, you would not find a weight difference. The chora, micrograms, what are we talking about? Nothing. You wouldn't find any difference. And then Shakil Agra, Vishakil Pachsa, he would take his money. And what else would he take? He would also take the loss. So he took the rental fee and he took the damages, right? That's Agra Upagra, like we said earlier. And Agra lo Pachsa, bi Pachsa lo Agra. I would have thought, says the Gemara. Now this Gemara is actually a little bit out of context because we already paskined on this, that Agra Upagra. So obviously this happened at a little bit of a different time. It happened earlier. So the Gemara says, I would have thought that wouldn't work because otherwise it should be ribis of some kind, mechsek ribis. So if you allow it by Yisomim, it must be that if you allow agro pagra by Yisomim, it must be that it's allowed for there to be ribis by Yisomim. Says the Gemara, Amar le, what are you talking about? Kiha, in such a case, afilu b'diknani, even with older people, diknani zakenim, Dalet and Zion, afilu b'diknani nami shar leme'avad. That's mutter. Why? Because when you're dealing with a copper pot, you also have to deal with the fact that you've singed and burned the copper pot, which is not a damage of weight. It's just a damage. It's still usable, but you've blackened it, so it's a little bit less money. Because every time you burn the nechosh, the copper pot, the nechoshes pot, it's butzer dmei, you lower the cost a little bit. It says you can't make an inference from your case that the kids of Mar Ukva, when they lent out an item to Shmuel, that they would measure it. That's not what it means. That's bichlal not what it means. What it means is that there was something else going on. There was the rental fee, and then there was like a reduction in cost based on use. And a third of the way down, the Gemara says, Amar Rabba bar Shila Amar of Chizda, Va'amrila Amar Rabba bar Yosef bar Chama Amar of Sheshes, Ma'os shel Yisomim, Moter lehalvosan, Karav leschar v'rachok behefsid. This is a din that is quoted in halacha. This din is quoted in Shulchan Aruch. The halacha is that for the money of Yisomim, you're allowed to lend them in a case scenario where they're more likely to get reward and less likely to have loss. Meaning you could borrow their money and invest it in a way where the risks are not even, where the investor will absorb more of the risk than the investee. And Tanu Rabbanan, in other circumstances, we would have said differently. Tanu Rabbanan, the Brisa says halfway down, Karov l'schar v'rachok said Russia. Typically, we would have assumed that that person is a Russia. That would have been Avak Ribis. But when we're dealing with Yisomim, we can override an Avak Ribis concern. So that's mutter. Karov said v'rachok l'schar chasid. If a person is investing money for someone to their own detriment, that's considered to be a chassid. Karov lazeh v'lazeh, if the benefits are similar to me and you. Rachok mizeh mizeh, if the benefits or lack thereof are similar to me and you. Zuhi midas kol adam, that's how normal people do loans. So what the Gemara is saying over here is that even though there is avak ribis in this case, where I take the loan, I take the money of a yasum, let's say there's a yasum out there, I invest their money where I run the risk of the losses and they are more likely to gain. So that means that I borrowed their money and gave them back more, but it wasn't ketutz, it was avak ribis. By Yisomim, we override that and we're matir, big kula. That's what the Gemara says, and it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. Amar le Rabba le Rabbi Yosef, Hani zuzi di yasmi hechi avdin lahu. How do we manage money that is for Yisomim? You're talking about young children. What's the right way to manage the money of Yisomim without running into halachic issues of ribis? So says the Gemara, answer number one of three. Amar le mosvin lahu beidin v'yavin lahu zuza zuza. The money sits in an envelope for family X, and the Bezdin gives out an allowance. You have $1,000 in the Yerusha. I'll give you $10 a week. So says the Gemara, that can't be because Amar le b'hakakalya karna. If you do that, the money won't last. Very odd that the Gemara assumes that the money needs to last. Why does it need to last? The kid got the money, so be it. So says the Gemara, and it's a very sensitive question. The Gemara says it's insufficient. We need to find a way for that money to function like an endowment, where it pumps off interest, and therefore the children can live off of this money in perpetuity. So 3/4 of the way down, the Gemara says, Amar le'mar hechi avid. I hear you, but what do you want to do? So the Gemara says, Amar le badkinan gavra de isle dava pricha. We go and see if somebody has pieces of gold. Namely, we go find someone who is particularly wealthy, and we take the monies of the Yisomim, v'naktinan dava mine. They give gold back to the family, to the Yisomim, v'yavinan lehune ale karav l'schar v'rachok lehafsid. And the wealthy person invests the money for the Yisomim in a way that's beneficial for them. Aval davar misuyam, but if the guy that we're looking at doesn't have dava pricha, he's not a guy who has something that uniquely makes him wealthy. He may own a lot of trinkets, he may own a lot of cars, but maybe they were gifts, maybe they don't actually indicate he's wealthy. Low, that's not a good idea. Because what?
Maybe he's a dentist.
I don't understand.
Cars.
I still don't know. What is that? Oh, your time. Okay. So the Gemara says that if the guy that we're trying to invest the Somim's money in has items that are not dava pricha, this specific type of gold that indicated wealth, low, that should not work. Dilma pikadon inhu, because perhaps those items are really a pikadon. And the owners of those pikadon are going to show up. Yoiv simarim, they're going to say, that's my item, that's my this, that's my that. And Yoiv simarim b'shakile, and then the Yisomim are going to lose out. So when we do this approach of taking the dollars of Yisomim and invest it with a wealthy person, it has to be someone who's authentically wealthy. Amar Ravashi, look, Teinach, I understand I understand if you have someone who is in fact particularly wealthy. But if we don't have someone who's particularly wealthy, so how then should we take care of the money of the Yisomim? After all, if we don't take good care of it, we'll be in the same boat as before. Kaliya Karna, that soon, if there's only $1,000 and you give out $10 a week, you only got 100 weeks. That's 2 years. These kids might be 2 years old. They need more than 2 years of dollars. So the Gemara provides its third and final answer, which will bring us to the 2 dots at the end of the page. A guy who has very honest and clean properties, who's trustworthy. He listens to Allah. And was not placed in Shamta, was not placed in excommunication by the rabbis. And he will be the one who will be responsible for it. Namely, we find Mr. Responsible. Whoever Mr. Responsible is, someone who's very trusted, someone who's erlich, and that is the person who will then invest the money. And that's the right way to take care of the money of Yisomim. Very interesting. Lo ala bedaiti, until I learned this Gemara, that we would have to make an effort to take the Yerusha of the Yisomim and invest it so that it functions in perpetuity. I didn't even cross my mind, never thought of it. I'm like, okay, just be careful with your money. Try not to spend it all at one time. But very, very delicate and sensitive Gemara. That brings us to the top of Ayin and Beis. We'll be learning until 2/3 of the way down, with ample time for those of you who need the 9:30 mile. We had already said on the previous page about the case of Tzon Barzel. Tzon Barzel is a case scenario where you are the investor, but once I am the manager of the investment, let's say the cow, I deal with all profits and losses. That's it. I have to give you back what you invested, and I have to give you back but you don't get anything else other than that. So between two Jews, Ein Mekabel and Tzon Barzel Yisrael Mibnei Shu Rivas. You gave me the cow. The problem is that if I give you back the cow, then I borrowed a cow, got a lot of extra money that you didn't get, and I gave you back the cow. Looks like interest. So between two Yidden, that's not allowed. Abal Mekabel and Tzon Barzel Min Ha'akum. But you are allowed to have this kind of relationship with a guy. That's acceptable. The Loven Mehen Umalvin Osan Berivis. So I'm not going to translate all the words here, but there's no problem of being of borrowing from and being malve to goyim as it relates to ribbis. V'chein beger toshav, which we have to analyze and figure. Malve Yisrael ma'osav shel akum midas akum aval lo midas Yisrael. So let's read these words, although they won't make a lot of sense today. A Yisrael can lend out the monies of a non-Jew, of an akum, with their das, but not with das Yisrael. This case remains cryptic, and we will deal with it in the Gemara. Rashi says the same. Yes, I know, says Rashi. It's difficult. Mefarish b'Gemara. Good. The Memra, there seems to be an implication in regards to the case of Tzon Barzel, the Birshusa de Mekabel Kaima, that there is still some type of connection to the original investor. We have the manager taking all the profits and all the losses. So says the Gemara, how can that be? Uraminhu. If there were to be a case of Tzon Barzel, Hamekabel Tzon Barzel min Anachim, Vlados Ptur min Abchora, it has to be that there still is some relationship between the investor and between the manager, because it's still pater from the Bechora. What is this talking about? So again, without the Rishonim, this Gemara would make no sense at all. I'm not reading it inside, but what's basically happening over here is as follows. Let's say that we have a Tzon Barzel relationship with Nachrim. So there's a cow. And then the cow has two children. So I get one cow, he gets the other cow. The cow that I have is the oldest cow. So then I'm a Yid, it should be a Bechor. So the halacha is that it's pater min Bechora. The animal that I got for my hard work is pater from Bechora. But that makes no sense. If I have all profits and losses, why shouldn't it be a Bechor? Why are you saying it's not a Bechor? Elamai, it must be that the Nachri still has a grasp over me in some way, shape, and form. So says the Gemara, don't worry. Amar Abaye, lo kasha. Hada mekabel alei on savizula. In one case scenario, we're talking about where the person is responsible for onsin, he's responsible for the lowering of prices. Hada lo kabel alei on savizula. The cases are different. It says the Gemara that our Mishnah is different than the Brisa that we quoted from Bechoros. That case of Hamakabel Tzon Barzel in the second line of the Gemara is a Gemara from Maseches Bechoros. So that's how we would distinguish between them. We would say that one of the cases was talking about where he's Makabel on himself own Savazula, where he was Makabel Ones and Zol and losses. And Hadalo Kabil Ale own Savazula. Amrle Abai, that can't work. Amrle Rava, Rava says that can't work. Because either Kabil Ale Mara own Savazula, then Tzon Barzel Karislang. Tzon Barzel, by definition, is where the manager takes all responsibility. So why would you say this is Tzon Barzel when the other guy is still taking some achrayas? That doesn't make any sense. But and furthermore, Adatani Seifa, we have the end of our Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? Aval Mekabel and Tzon Barzel min ha'akum. If that's true, says the Gemara, liflog v'lisnei bidida, then we should have had our Mishnah be listed differently, and we don't. What would have been the new reading of our Mishnah? A third of the way down. When would our Mishnah be true about Tzon Barzel by Yisrael? That is Delo Kabil Leon Savzula. Aval Kabil Mara on Savzula, then Shapir Dami. So why don't we say that? Ella says the Gemara, Ella Marava Idi Idi Delo Kabil Ale Mara on Savzula. Both our Mishnah and the Gemara from Maseches Bechoros, neither of them are talking about cases where the investor accepted an ones or the investor accepted the zula, the lowering of prices. We just have a unique din by a bechor. The gabe bechoros hainu tam devlados p'tur bechora. Why is it that the Gemara in Maseches Bechoros indicates that there would be no bechor for the animal of the manager? Because says the Gemara, kevan de'ilo yahiv zuze. If I, the manager, never pay back the principal to that guy, so then asi nachri, then the non-Jew will come and tafis lala behema. He's going to come take my animal. Remember that yes, he's the investor and I am responsible for profits and losses, but I still have to pay him back the principal. So if I don't pay back the principal, the nachri is going to come and take my animal. And even if my animal is the oldest, because the nachri has access to my animal under certain circumstances, therefore there's no bechor. Why? Because v'ilo mishkach la lebehema tafis lehu levlados. If he doesn't find the principal animal, he's going to come over to me and take my animal away. V'habale yad nachri be'emtza. And what will then happen is that the nachri will basically have his hand, namely he'll have access to my animal. And if a nachri has access to my animal, even if it is the firstborn animal, there is no din of bechor. V'chol yad nachri be'emtza pater mina bechora. Whenever we have a case scenario of a non-Jew having access to my animal, so then there's no din of bechor. It's an inherent, it's like a character flaw. You can't have a non-Jew having access to the bechor. We're going to stop right here at Marbet, 12 lines or so from the bottom, 3/4 of the way down on Ayin Aleph in the base. Tomorrow night, Amir Hashem will learn as much as we can. Ayin Aleph, Amid Aleph looks pretty long. It's a long Bible. We'll do as much as we can. And then we're back into Shabbos again. All right. Wishing you all a beautiful night.